Transportation, a little bit repetitive here. Transportation, again, as I've mentioned before, the innovations there trigger more industrial demand. Greater access breeds greater demand in some instances, and in particularly with accessibility to consumer goods. Also here, steamships, railroads, refrigerated rail cars, ice boxes, whether they are the traditional kind, the old kind, or the modern refrigerator. Even for average everyday suburbanite consumers, the development of the bicycle as a new form of transportation, especially for women. They were largely marketed to women, and becomes another way to get around. The new industries sort of dovetail into the new technologies. So there are going to be new chemical industries, dye factories being one example. New consumer-based industries alongside of textile and steel production, the sort of the heavy industries of before. Electrical and utility companies become necessary now, especially as urban areas begin to electrify. You need to have power plants to service those cities. The automobile industry will spring out of the development of the internal combustion engine. And because we have a new class of people, this working class that has certain working hours, we have, and they're otherwise in cities, we need to have what do people do when they're not working? So we have leisure activities, and clubs are organized. That some clubs are developed for sports, or you can go, and if you were a member of the working class, you could go take some classes so that you might learn technical skills to improve your status within the factory system. Maybe become an engineer, things like that. We don't necessarily call that leisure, but it's certainly an activity that's available to people. And we've already mentioned the impact of the Industrial Revolution on agriculture and the development of different farm implements. The whole Cyrus McCormick Company, the International Harvester Company, the mechanization before even we get to tractors, right? Whether they're steam-driven, steam power plant tractors, or later diesel tractors. Before we even get there, we have a vast mechanization of harvesters and planting machines that will truly make agriculture more efficient. And of course, there are a number of government policies that have to be enacted to sort of cope with all of these changes. As we've said in another context, we see the development of classical liberalism, and one of the things that comes hand in glove with this is the free trade policy, right? And this is now not just, this is free trade in the European context. It's also free trade in a global context, because as we start to look at the combined development of industrial revolution, liberalism that was unleashed by the French Revolution, and a new round of European imperialism, one of the biggest motivating factors of imperialism is the access to new markets globally, and so therefore we have free trade policies. One of the classic examples of that are the Opium Wars in China, where the British want to freely trade with various port cities in China. Particularly, they want to trade opium that they are producing in the mountains of North India, the crown jewel of their empire. They know that the folks in coastal cosmopolitan China want access to opium. The Chinese government does not sees the harm in this influx of highly addictive drugs on their population, and they crack down on it. And the British basically use a form of gunboat diplomacy by which to say, no, you're going to allow, there is demand, your people want this, we believe in free trade, phooey on you, Chinese government, and we're just going to go right in there, and if you don't like it, then our warships are simply going to shell your cities until you agree to our demands. It is not the best picture of the way in which capitalism can sometimes work, but free trade policy is not a weak one. It has teeth behind it. If you don't want to trade freely, there will be consequences to folks who hold to older forms of economic policy. We see the Corn Law repeal movement in Britain and in continental Europe, where similar laws were in place. Laws that restricted the importation of food from other countries, of wheat from other countries, in order to keep prices higher for local or homegrown, literally, producers. This is seen as anti-capitalist because there are new sources of wheat production throughout Europe during this time, especially as transportation becomes more efficient. The Black Earth region of southern Russia, what is today modern Ukraine, becomes more accessible to the wider world. And so, as a result, or the British around the British Empire, production from the Canadian prairie provinces will fast become a source of foodstuffs for the growing British population. That's a little bit different because that's internal to the British Empire. But the repeal of the Corn Laws, excuse me, is an important step in allowing the free trade not only with other countries but also within imperial systems. The German customs union. We've talked about how there's a multiplicity of little German territories. Well, the Prussian government decided to basically work in a series of bilateral and multilateral agreements across the northern part of Germany to create essentially what was like a customs union, a free trade zone among these different little German territories and the Kingdom of Prussia itself. In part, this was a government policy that was not only economic, but it was also one that had as an end goal, potential end goal, sort of soldering these little German principalities to the Kingdom of Prussia in an effort to unite both economically and then eventually politically the German states under the leadership of the Prussian government. South Germany tended to be more in the orbit of Austria-Hungary. That's a story for another time in terms of German unification. But we can see how sort of free trade, a kind of lurking nationalism bent towards unification, and politics all sort of work together in the Prussian example. One can also look at the Prussian customs union, the Zollverein, as a prototype, a very early prototype of what, to some extent, the European Union, the EEC and its later incarnations, today we'd call it the European Union, would do in the latter part of the 20th century. As we've been talking, railroads and steamships and airplanes, and so now, of course, we need to talk ports and harbors and roads and all the mechanisms of infrastructure that need to be worked on. Sanitation in urban areas is going to be a major investment opportunity, but also meet a dire need as populations in urban areas grow, and the need to have clean cities becomes important. The development of hospitals in urban areas to not only keep the cities clean, but also to treat the sick, and so on and so forth. We also do see, with those boom and bust cycles, as much as you do have free traders, you also have sort of what I call neo-mercantilists, people who are going to come in and are going to play with tariffs a little bit, to be, during bust cycles, be more protectionist. So we'll see how when the economy starts to falter, the tariffs go up a little bit to protect the home industries, and then when the economy is good, that's usually when you have the ascendancy of the free traders to get the economy moving again, both internally, domestically, but then also looking at overseas markets to sell your products. And finally, the advent of consumerism. The consumer culture really takes its cue from the late 19th century. We talked about advertising already. catalogs that can go out to rural areas that might not have access to big stores, so that we can begin to see people mail ordering production. Mail becomes important, right? Another infrastructure investment. So now we can ship those goods to people in more remote places. So logistics become a thing now, whereas it had been sort of primitive in the pre-industrial ages. Department stores. This is Selfridges in London. There's a TV series that came out not terribly long ago on that, the department store. One of the first department stores was the one in Paris, the Bon Marche. Then you have others like Harrods, and in America you would have Macy's and Wanamaker's in Philadelphia. Um, and really the whole idea of a single store that you could go into, and it would have all these different departments where you could just walk around and shop, and you could get if you were a lady, you could get your new dress, and you could get stockings, and you could get a hat, and you could get shoes, and you could get the perfume and the whole ensemble, right? As opposed to the way you needed to do that before was you went to the dressmaker for the dress, and then you had to go to a haberdasher to have your hat made to match the dress, and so on. Was much more complicated. And department stores will do to those smaller craft producers sort of what the internet is doing to department stores and big box stores today. Slowly, we start to see that older form of sales and commerce sort of die back a little bit. It's much easier to go into the department store and get everything you need. The buyers who run the department stores ensure that their products are all work together, so you don't have to worry about dyes, certain colors not matching. They'll be able to work all of that out and create ensembles, and you just go and you buy what's on the mannequin, sort of thing. All right, or you and better still, you don't have to wait for it to arrive in the mail. You can just take it home right there with you. Right, and all of these things lead to higher standards of living in good economies. So when there is more disposable income because wages are high, grain prices, food prices are low, you can see people going out to the store periodically and buying nicer things for their home. Again, it is not a disposable economy, so you will have people who will buy nice things and they will keep them for long periods of time. They will become sort of family heirloom types of things. They will take great care of what they have. But it is the beginning of that widespread consumer culture. All right, that is all for now. So we have another couple of installments of this, but for now, thank you very much for listening.